Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning into our inaugural Capitalist videocast. Joining me today is Carl Marrara. He is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Carl, for folks who aren't familiar with PMA, could you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Leo, and thanks to CAP for hosting this and everybody who's joining us in real time. So the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association is the statewide nonprofit trade association representing the people who make things all throughout the Commonwealth, and all the employees on the plant floor, all 575,000 of them, and all the money that is involved in that process. So over $92 billion in gross state product, all kinds of companies, and everything from Hershey bars to helicopters to lighters to steel and different metals. But also we really do our best to represent all the upstream and downstream activity that occurs in manufacturing. So the vendors of industrial services and the suppliers, but also, the raw components, which a lot of times is energy and water resources and all those, the logistics industries that go into that.
Well, I always enjoy what you guys put out. I'm, a subscriber on your email list, and you did a really cool thing this year in terms of the election analysis, really taking a look at the top 10 Senate races and the top 20 House races. And the State House and State Senate, state races in general really tend to get overlooked.
They do.
So yeah. I was really hoping today that you and I could talk a little bit about the state races, not to gloss over the presidential race, but everybody's talking about that.
Sure.
So I was thinking that we could just start with the row offices that were at the the second tier of the statewide races.
Yeah. So, and a little bit of background on those emails. So the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association is the state deployment partner for BIPAC, which is the Business Industry Political Action Committee in Washington, D.C. BIPAC, it's funny, the name or the acronym PAC often gets associated with kind of direct expenditures to candidates, which is actually not what BIPAC does at all. They're the oldest pro-business political action committee in the entire United States. And what's interesting about them is that they focus on the exchange of information via employer to employee, and kind of that whole route of advocacy within the workplace. So again, we're the state deployment partner for them. And if you go to paprosperity.com, that's where you can find a lot of those candidate side-by-sides. It's all information, again, geared toward getting the employer to engage their employee in that political and policy process. But yes, at the row officer, you look at the top of the ticket, and then immediately below that are the Pennsylvania row offices. So you've got the Attorney General, the Auditor General, and the Treasurer. And I don't want to say that it was out of the realm of possibility, but the fact that we're looking at probably having two of those row offices back in Republican control, to me is almost a direct referendum to the role that the Wolf administration has taken on this COVID-19 pandemic reaction, overreaction, quite honestly, in the amount of economic shutdown. It is not a stretch to say that Pennsylvania probably has the strictest shutdown measures of any of the 50 states. And the legislature has tried to keep us on equal footing with other states, especially competitor states. The governor at one point with the original shutdown did not follow the CISA guidelines, or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency under the Department of Homeland Security guidelines. And the legislature has continually tried to right ship on that. Again, I just think that the campaign message kind of the whole way along was that the Wolf administration kind of has unfettered access to these row offices, that those row officers that are currently serving are really just kind of a shell of the Wolf administration, and that there needs to be a bigger check and balance on the Wolf administration. And that's what we're getting.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that really, particularly from the Auditor General's office. The outgoing Auditor General Eugene D. Pasquale was kind of charged with doing an audit of the waivers program, and what he put out was really, I mean, really no more than a press release.
Yeah, I mean, David Taylor, our president CEO, I think very rightfully said, as soon as that came out, a press release is not an audit. And I mean, even a 5-page press release is certainly not an audit. And that was, I mean, we still don't have answers, but I think we're going to get them with Tim DeFore, who is the Republican candidate. He's from Dauphin County. We talked with Tim a lot, and he was really an impressive candidate against Nina Ahmad out of Philadelphia. I think she was a deputy assistant mayor or something. I mean, really had almost no qualifications to be the Auditor General. But it was a very large primary on the Democratic side. I believe that there were, I think, at least 5 different candidates, and she came out on top, probably because of the Philadelphia populist vote, and which is not uncommon in a Democratic primary. Tim ran a good campaign. And you know what was different about Tim's campaign from others is that he went into areas where Republicans typically do not go. He spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, in Center City, Philadelphia, and South Philadelphia. I'm going to be very interested to see the breakdown of his final numbers and where his support came from, especially in areas that probably went like 19-1 Biden. Even picking up 3 out of those 19 in his favor would be more than what pushed him over the edge. And he ran ahead of President Trump. He ran ahead of the other 2 row office candidates across the board. And I think that that's a direct result of the way that he campaigned, doing it a little bit differently than, and there were some people, maybe myself included, who weren't quite sure how this strategy was going to go. And he's certainly proven that it worked.
And then the new treasurer is Stacey Garrity.
Stacey Garrity, yes. Again, ran a kind of opposite of Tim. This is kind of what we saw back in 2016 with Trump and Toomey. You saw Toomey do really well in the collar counties around Philadelphia and even some of the areas in Philadelphia, whereas you saw Trump in the rural parts of Western Pennsylvania go like gangbusters. I think that we're going to see something very similar here with Garrity versus, I mean, not that they were against each other, but I think that Garrity's road to victory is very different than Tim DeFore's. Even though their numbers are really similar, I think that you're going to see the percentage points in especially that northern tier and in northwestern Pennsylvania. Stacey Garrity's numbers are going to be through the roof. And she spent a lot of time
from the Williamsport area too, doesn't she?
Yes. I think it's like she might be Elk County. Okay. She's up in that area, but you're gonna see a lot of support up in that area. I still think you'll see some of the down ballot support in the Southeast, similar to where other Republicans got it, but you're really going to see it the numbers padded up in that area, and that's what cemented or should cement her victory. It's not official yet.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see, fingers crossed, we're going to get some we're going to get some accountability for the Wolf administration from those 2 row offices. Going into, kind of stepping back and actually starting, let's, take a look at the state house and state Senate races. There was a lot of fear that the House and or the Senate was going to flip into Democratic control. National Democratic organizations spent tens of millions of dollars to that effort. I know that there were some state house races where big money outside, liberal organizations dropped like $1 million on. I
was going to say, we're talking like U.S. Senate money. We're not talking a state house race. But yeah.
And that fear, it didn't pan out. And as I mentioned earlier, you did that great kind of analysis going into it. What's the actual, do we know yet what the actual counts are going to be in terms of the size of the Republican majority?
I wish we had a final answer. We still don't. I think it's going to be probably another. I'm hoping it's going to be not more than another few days. I mean, really, this process should be done. So yeah, I think that early, like after 2018, after the elections in 2018, off presidential year, Democrats, I mean, up until 2018, you have to remember in the Pennsylvania Senate, Republicans had a supermajority, not just a majority, a supermajority. And the Democrats took, what, 4 seats, I think, back in 2018. But they felt like the momentum was certainly in their favor. Those midterm elections are a lot of times where Republicans do very well. It's the presidential years where Republicans get a little bit nervous, especially on some like pickoff races when it comes to open seat races. So I think early on, like 2019, early 2020, I think that the House, or the Senate Republicans had the most fear that the chamber could possibly flip. Coming up probably 2 or 3 weeks before this election day is really when you started to hear some of the Pennsylvania politicos say, hey, wait a second, the Senate might be all right, but it looks like the House Republicans are actually in a position where there could be enough flips in the Southeast that if they win 2 or 3 seats in southwestern Pennsylvania, that the chamber could ultimately flip. And I mean, people started to get nervous about it. There was no reason to be nervous. I mean, prior to going live here, Leo, I told you that, I don't want to diminish anybody's feelings about the top of the ticket and what's happening at the top of the ticket. But if you take the presidential out of it, if you would have given me the results that we are currently sitting on, as of this recording, so I mean, almost a week post-election, and put it in front of me on the Wednesday after the election, I would have said Republicans had a banner night. I mean, an absolute banner night. In a cycle where Democrats were expecting to pick up seats and if not overturn entire chambers, didn't happen. Not in Pennsylvania and really not anywhere else. I mean, there were across the entire country, Republicans truly had a banner night. And it's a little bit of a roller coaster. There was a little bit of a mirage on Tuesday night and Wednesday morning because of the kind of the disparity, or I don't want to say the disparity, but the how slow the process was to count the mail-in votes. And I mean, you have to remember, mail-in voting in Pennsylvania is brand new. And I mean, this was an idea that was formulated even before there was any kind of COVID pandemic. So I mean, elections officers, I think, are doing yeoman's work, and the volunteers that are sitting and opening those envelopes and putting them through the machines. I mean, it's unbelievable the work that's happening, but it is a little bit slow. I mean, and to be expected. But the Senate, getting kind of back to the original premise of the conversation of where the numbers are. So the Senate going into this election, let me pull up some of my notes here. So before it was 28, 21, and 1 before the election. It looks like it's probably going to remain 28, 21, and 1, except that there is an outstanding race where the Republican is currently in the lead. That's Nicole Zeccarelli over Jim Brewster. She's currently up 350 to 400 votes, but that the vote count there hasn't changed in days. It remains in kind of the mid-high 80s. That's out in Allegheny County. So that could be a second flip. So that means the GOP could actually have a 29 to 20 to 1 advantage. And that one independent is John Utachak up in Northeast Pennsylvania. He's independent, but he's caucusing with the Republicans. But he's obviously a true independent. He did endorse Joe Biden for the presidency, even though he is caucusing with the Republicans. So that's where it looks like things are. And that same majority, though, isn't the same seats. There was a switch. Incumbent Republican Tom Killian is likely facing defeat at challenger John Kane. Kane currently holds like a 3.5 advantage, but Democrat incumbent Pam Iovino in Allegheny County lost her reelection bid to Devlin Robinson, and he flipped that seat by about 4 points.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, going back to the conversation in 2016, 2018, and now 2020, what we've kind of seen happening is you really have to look at it in terms of the trend over the long term. What
Absolutely.
we're really seeing is a solidification of Democrats just kind of moving up the ballot and flipping seats in southeastern Pennsylvania. And you have the opposite happening in southwestern Pennsylvania, and to a slightly more limited extent up in the northeastern part of the state, where you have what used to be solidly Democratic, your blue dog Reagan Democrats are now moving into the Republican Party, and their votes for state house, state senate are now reflecting that they're voting for Republicans at all levels of the ballot. So it really looks like, particularly in the Senate and then in some of the House races, what we've seen is just kind of a continuation of that pattern.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Luzerne and Lackawanna County. So I apologize for looking down. I'm looking at some notes here.
No worries. It's a lot to keep track of.
I can't keep all these numbers and counties in my head. I mean, Pennsylvania's quite a, we love our government here. So in 2016, Trump won 46.77% of the vote in Lackawanna County. I mean, how I don't have that memorized, I don't know. But then in 2018, Lackawanna County went 65% for Governor Wolf. Luzerne County for Trump in 2016 went 58.29% to Trump, and for Wolf went 51%. So you are seeing in those off-election years in the Northeast that there is still some ground to make up for the Republicans. But you're exactly right in those trend lines. I mean, and I always kind of joke that and I don't want to offend anybody, but that sometimes I'm good at that. A southeastern Republican is less conservative than a southwestern Democrat in Pennsylvania, and you're starting to see the voter demographic trends kind of go along with that. That you're seeing even in those areas in the Southeast, like one of the seats that we'll go over in the House, former Representative Steve Barrar's seat went to a Republican, right? But Republicans in that district outnumbered Democrat registered voters by about 12 points. But the voter performance there has been, especially at the top of the ticket, strictly Democratic. Now down ballot, a lot of those registered Republicans are voting Democrat at the top of the ticket and then coming back home down ballot. But I don't know that lasts for forever. But you're having the complete opposite out in Western Pennsylvania, where, I mean, you're seeing districts that are 20 points more Democratic in registration than Republicans, that Trump is carrying 65 to 70% of the vote. I mean, it's really, truly, I don't want to say it's an anomaly, because you're exactly right in that there are trends that have been in place for probably close to 12 to 15 years. It's just we're now starting to see kind of the registration and the voter metrics kind of match up what we already knew.
So speaking of the House, you had mentioned one particular. You had mentioned that wanted to talk about one particular House race. Let's talk about like the global numbers, and then we can come
sure.
back to them.
So it was at 109 to 93 to 1. So Republican favor at 109, Democrats at 93, and there was one vacant seat. But that vacant seat was former Speaker Mike Terzai's seat, and that's always been held. Or it's been held in Republican control for as long as I've been in Harrisburg. But so it was effectively kind of a 110 to 93 Republican majority. And Rob Mercuri, who was the Republican who was running in former Speaker Terzai's seat, was successful. That was one that a lot of people were looking at because Emily Skopov, or I'm trying to remember exactly what her last name was, but she actually ran against Speaker Turzai in the past and had seen some kind of success. So I think Republicans were a little bit nervous on that seat in particular, and kind of used it as a little bit of a bellwether for what might be happening in some of the other House races in that area. But it looks like the GOP. I mean, in a case where I'm not kidding you, like a week prior to the election, there were a lot of people who were really nervous about the Republicans just holding on to control. Looks like they're going to grow their majority to 113 to 91. And new members being Kerry Del Rosso, possibly beating Frank Dermody, who's the current minority leader in the House. I mean, that would be, shocking. We knew Kerry was a really good candidate, but beating the power of the incumbency of the minority leader with the money and the press that comes with that is I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't been in Harrisburg forever, but I don't know that we've seen that too often.
Yeah, we were actually involved in 2018 in the challenger to Dermody's race, and his numbers were weaker than what we thought they would be. Like through our political action committee, we did some polling and saw that it was worthwhile to get into it. We weren't involved in it this time around, but the fact that it's turning out to be as close as it is really is it speaks to the volume of Republican turnout.
Yeah,
particularly in that district.
It goes back to the point that you had made earlier, Leo, about the trend lines and what's happening out west versus what's happening out east, and how that continually is evolving. We also have Jason Silvas beating Joe Petrarca, and Shelby Labs ousting Wendy Ullman. That's actually down in the southeast. So that would take us from 110 to 113. There were two other seats that were open seats that swap parties. So Neil Goodman's seat up in the northeast portion of the Commonwealth went to Tim Twardzik, who's actually the son of Mrs. T's Pierogies. Yep. And Tim is a great guy and is going to be a great representative and will represent that area very well. And then Tom Mert, which is the Pennsylvania 152nd. Nancy Gwenst defeated Karen Hawk by about a solid 8 points. But I mean that's an even split then. So that's a push for the House because those two seats cancel each other out, and then it's looking like we're going to have possibly definitely two new Republican House members, possibly three.
Yeah, and both of those seats, the Mertz seat and what's going to become the new Twardzik seat, are really again continuations of that trend line. When we were looking at the numbers for Twardzik's district, I think that Trump won that district in 16, something like with 65 or 66% of the vote, maybe even more, and then flip that. Clinton won Mertz seat. By a similar, 65, 66 points, when in 2016. So both of those are just kind of continuations of the trend that we've been seeing.
And quite honestly, that was one that, especially the Goodman seat, was one that Republicans were counting on holding. And in those days leading up to the election, where some GOP analysts and Pennsylvania politicos were getting nervous that the Pennsylvania House could flip, many were pointing to that seat and saying, "Well, it's actually it's a steeper mountain to climb for the Democrats than you think, because that one's pretty much already decided."
Yeah. So other than Frank Dermody potentially losing, any other surprises? Any races that were like closer than you thought they would be?
There were a number that were actually not as close as I thought that they would be. There were
which is also a surprise.
Excuse me?
It's also a surprise, just in the other direction.
Right. I think again, a lot of them were kind of in the Southwest. There were, like Valerie Gatos' seat, Lori Mizgorski's seat. There were a number of them out there where I think Valerie won by a solid 4 or 5 points. I mean, a lot of people thought that was going to be, down to the wire. And again, kind of looking at the what was Speaker Turzai's open seat, for me, that was the bellwether for what was going to happen in the rest of because there are a lot of Republican lawmakers who are seeking reelection for the first time, being that Valerie Gatos, Lori Mizgorski, that kind of that camp of Natalie Mihalik, that camp of that Southwestern Republican. And I was looking at Rob McCreary's, Rob McCreary's seat, former Speaker Terzai's seat, and thinking if that's an open seat race where you actually possibly have some more name ID toward the Democrat challenger because she ran against Speaker Terzai in the year before, if that seat goes overwhelmingly to the Democrat challenger, you could have a lot of those first-term Republicans in the Southwest in a little bit of trouble, and it never happened. And every analyst, was looking at those with a really, really keen eye, and it was just kind of a big nothing. The one that I included on the list, and it's kind of funny how not close at all it was. Scott Conklin in the State College area. This was one that I had thrown on our list of 20 races to watch, mainly because I thought that there would be a lot of State College students that would not be on campus. Right. And when we get to the mail-in voting, I wasn't sure if they were going to be mail-in voters for their school address, for their home address. Where is home? Is home Virginia, Massachusetts, somewhere else in Pennsylvania? How is that going to play in? And that ended up not even being close. So I had included it on the list as something to watch, but that was just a big bowl of nothing. So that was one where that shouldn't have ever been on the list in the first place, but it was a fun exercise of thought.
Yeah. Well, hey, Carl, we're coming up on almost a half hour, and I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate, you taking some time to come on and talk about, the whole spectrum of the races that were on the ballot here in Pennsylvania. And I definitely look forward to having you on again. Thank you just so much for your time. And
thank you. I mean, ultimately, I think the end here is looking at 2020. I mean, we're already looking at 2022. And, you look at the list of especially Democrats in the Pennsylvania Senate, and they've got to be nervous because there are a lot of vulnerable Democrats in the Senate that are going to be up. I think that Wolf is going to have a very difficult 2 years finishing his term because he's got steeper majorities to face in both legislative chambers, and he's got 2 row officers that are going to be kind of keeping a check and balance. So, we definitely have divided government in Pennsylvania. And keep in mind, all of this, the reason, and you alluded to this earlier, the reason that the Democrats dropped congressional, if not U.S. Senate type money into Pennsylvania is because with the 2020 census, we're going to be facing redistricting. And the governor is going to have to go against very strong majorities in both legislative chambers. That is why the Democrats outspent the Republicans probably nearly 4 to 1, and they got nothing for it. Absolutely nothing. And
they set a pile of money on fire.
They really did. And again, it wasn't just in Pennsylvania. It was all across the country. And heading into redistricting is going to be, not ideal for Governor Wolf and for the Democrats. And we're going to see how that all plays out. But that's where we're at.
All right, Carl. Thanks very much. And you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, everybody who tuned in live on Facebook to watch this. And we'll be posting the video to make sure you'll be able to share it for folks who weren't able to catch it live.
Well, thank you, Leo, and for the work that you guys do.